Okay, good evening everybody. Welcome to part 35, is it? I'm not sure. Of Mesilas Yesharim, Finding Your Path. Tonight we're going to be talking about lying, falsehood, and we're going to start off where we left off last week, which is the paragraph starts, Ulam Hashvois. However, oaths. Now, a little introduction is necessary because in the modern world we live in, people are very light with their speech. They're very largely unconcerned. The whole idea of the severity of an oath, of a shavua, and the Torah regards shavuos extremely seriously. This is a concept that's very foreign to us. So I think a little preliminary understanding of the severity of all speech, speech itself, and certainly shavuos. Shavuos shav, a false oath, it's interesting, we talk about Chil Hashem. Chil Hashem, to most people's mind, the desecration of God's name, means that a Jew, and more specifically probably an Orthodox Jew, does something which is a desecration of God's name. Does something like, for example, if he cheats in business, if he does something unscrupulous. I remember Nota Schiller, should be well, once told us a story about somebody sitting in a carriage in a railway, in a railway car, and there was this picture of this Orthodox Jew, seemingly with a nice big beard, and somebody was pointing out to him, this rabbi who was sitting next to him, this picture, and this guy's going inside for embezzlement. And so the rabbi said the problem was that under his beard he was unshaven. The thing is that we as Jews, I remember the first time I put a couple on my head and walked out into the street, I realized that everything had changed. I'd become an ambassador for the Jewish people, and everything that I did now would be viewed by the fact that, and I could be Mekadesh Shem Shemaim, if I get up for an old lady on the subway, if old ladies still do go onto the subway, I don't know if they still do that, but if I pushed in line in the queue at the exit to the 7-Eleven, so it's not this guy pushing in line, it was this Jew pushing in line. So, the good name of the Ribbono Shel Olam and the Jewish people perches precariously on a small piece of cloth on the top of our heads. And of course, every person who's recognizable as a Jew has to remember he's an ambassador. And that's the general concept of Chil Hashem, that a person is seen to be doing something which is, obviously I have to learn the halachas more specifically, but generally, somebody who does something which brings into disrepute the name of God or the name of the Torah, or is called Chil Hashem. But there's another concept. People don't realize that there's also a possibility of a Chil Hashem. And you're asking me, why am I talking about Chil Hashem when we're talking about Shavuot, oaths? Because there's a pasuk that says, V'lo siso eshem eshmi l'shav. You shouldn't raise up God's name in vain, which is to take a Shavuos shav, a false oath. V'lo tischalel, v'lo yischalel, and Hashem's name shouldn't be mischalel. So we see that there's a possibility of doing Chil Hashem, God forbid, even in private. It doesn't have to be. I agree most of the time Chil Hashem is something public. But the juxtaposition of not taking a Shavuos shav and saying, v'lo yischalel, it shouldn't be mischal, or shouldn't be, desecrated my shmi, my name, says Hashem. It means that through person making, and of course we don't understand how this happens, but the mystical forces that exist in the world, the spiritual connections are such that when a person makes a false oath, this in some way causes a desecration of God's name. So I was thinking to myself, I don't know if I mentioned in the past that we know it says, Etzer le'uma zeh os Elokim. God makes everything equal and opposite. Etzer le'umat zeh. This opposed to that. The world consists of black and white, good and bad, positive and negative. All of the world has been created in this way of equal and opposite. And therefore, if it must be, God forbid, that a person can desecrate God's name in private, it also means that he can sanctify God's name in private. And this reminded me very much of something that Rav Chaim Volozhin says, that, as you know, Rav Chaim Volozhin in the Nefesh HaChaim describes how every action in this world causes a chain reaction, which goes up and up and up and up to the highest places of existence, to the control room of the whole world, of the whole existence. And that causes a shefa, an influence of good, or God forbid the reverse, to come down into this world. You do a mitzvah, you do a chesed, you encourage somebody, that spiritual energy echoes all the way up to the highest places, to the control room, so to speak, and comes all the way down. And it can come down in many different ways. Let's say that mitzvah will bring shefa down to the world, and a typhoon that was going to happen in the China Sea will get cancelled. We don't see how these things happen. We don't see how our actions have spiritual ramifications all over the world, not just for the Jewish people, for the whole of mankind, for the whole of the existence. So there's this concept, and I was thinking to myself, so if it's possible, God forbid, to mechal Shem Shemaim in private, then it's also possible to mekadesh Shem Shemaim in private. And I think I could be right in saying that when a person is learning Torah principally, which is something which, it's true, you don't have to do by yourself, but it's possible when you sit by yourself, or with the chavrusa for that matter, and you learn Torah, this creates a Kiddush Hashem. It creates a more clear perception that there's a God running the world, that Hashem, the God of the Jews, Elokei Yisrael, is Hu HaMelech, is the King. This creates a greater clarity for people in the world at large to see. As the Nefesh HaChaim says, also he says that in the other way around, and to the negative side, this idea that, let's say, a big Talmid Chacham, one day he doesn't learn with quite all of his might. He learns a little bit less. So that means that somebody who normally learns be'iyun, in depth, he learns Bekius. Now, I'm not saying anything wrong with Bekius, but clearly, iyun, when a person delves into the deeper understanding of the Gemara and all its depths, as far as he can go, this is a higher level. A person has to have Bekiyut, he has to have Reka, he has to have knowledge on a wide scale. But let's assume for the sake of argument that Bekiyut is less in some way than iyun. So somebody who normally learns Bekiyus will then, let's say, pick up a Mishnayos. Somebody picks up a Mishnayos will learn Chumash Rashi. Somebody who normally learns Chumash Rashi will pick up, I don't know, I'm not making judgments here, will say a couple of Perek Tehillim. Someone who normally says Perek Tehillim every day and he doesn't do that, I don't know, he'll pick up a book about some Godel, Yisrael, a great Jewish scribe, and he'll read that instead, and then somebody doing that will read another book, and they'll pick up a newspaper, and this chain of Yerida, of descent will eventually end up, says the Nefesh HaChaim, with a Jewish boy marrying a non-Jewish girl in Paris. So everything, that's something that starts off. So I want to say, just as it's possible, to, God forbid, to be mechal Hashem Shemaim, to desecrate Hashem's name in private, lo sisa eshmi, but you shouldn't raise up my name and cause a chil Hashem. So similarly, by a person being mekadesh Shem Shemaim in private, by learning Torah, or doing a chesed in private for that matter, something that nobody sees, this on the other hand, this in the reverse causes a kiddush Hashem in the world. The reason I'm talking all about this is because it's difficult for us, as I said, to understand the severity of shvuot, of oaths, of vows. But if you put it back into the context of the fact that everything in this world comes from dibur, from speech, shehakol niyeh bidvaro. one of the brachot we make is that Hashem creates everything with words. The word for Hebrew for word, davar, is the same for a thing. Dibur, davar, thing, word. Things are basically words. Everything in this world exists and continues to exist. B'davar Hashem, with the word of Hashem. Hashem speaks existence into being. And therefore, speech is the very foundation of the creation. And man has been given an awesome power through his speech to be able to, that's B'Tselem Elokim, this is what the Nefesh HaChaim says, to be able to affect the world as it is. Man also has the power of creation. Man doesn't have the power of creation, yesh me'ayin, ex nihilo, something from nothing. But man does have the power through his dibur to create yesh miyesh. Our words have an effect. Our words can change things. And therefore, an oath is something which really has the ability. It's a very serious thing because it touches on the very foundations of the universe itself. So that's what he says. Ulam hashvuos, a person who's not careful with his shvuos, afal pi shemin astam kol she'ena mina hediotos nishma mehotzi shem shemayim mipiv levatala. Even though most people, unless he's somebody who is on a very low level, is careful not to utter oaths, and therefore using the name of Hashem, that is, motzi shem shemayim mipiv levatala, for no reason whatsoever. Kol shekein b'shvua, all the more so, he will be careful with the shvua. Yesh oid eze anofim ketanim. Even though most people are careful, I mean, again, this is speaking to a world, that's why I prefaced this, where this was poshut. It was simple, it was obvious. I don't think it's so obvious anymore that people are so careful in this regard. But let's say a religious Jew, a frum Jew, would be careful in this regard. Excuse me, as we know, the Mesilas Yesharim is addressing this book to people who believe in the Torah, believe in God, but to the extent that a person doesn't pay attention to things, that's his premise, he'll ignore them, he'll forget them. So even a person who's careful not to utter oaths, and not to be motzi shem shemayim levatala, not to use the name of God for no reason, to cause a chil Hashem, a desecration of Hashem's name, as we mentioned before. Yesh od eza anofim ketanim. There are other small branches, she'afal pi she'enam min ha'chamurim yoseh, which are not the most serious infractions and transgressions. Al kol ponim rui lemi sheroitz liyos neki l'shomer mehem. It's worthwhile, at any rate, for somebody who wants to be a naki, clean. Again, this whole chapter 11, is about the second level of observance, of steering yourself clear from aveiros, from sins, which is to be clean. Somebody wants to be clean from any problem connected with making an oath. V'hu masha omru, and that's when we get into the area of what says, Omer Rabbi Elazar, lav shavua v'hein shavua. There's a Gemara in Shavuos that says, the Rabbi Elazar says, if you say no, that's an oath. When you say no to something, you're committing yourself. And if you say yes, that's an oath. And Omer Rava says, v'hu Omer lav trei zimne v'hu. Sorry, and that's the same idea. The Rava says, if somebody says love, no, 2 times, that's a commitment of an oath. It's as though he's made an oath. V'odama hein trei zimne. The same would be if he says twice yes. That's an oath. V'chein amru v'hin tzedek. When talking about weights and measures, the Torah says that your hin should be righteous. Hin is a dry weight. I don't know exactly how much it is. It's a certain weight. We could check it out. But the pun on the word hin is hein. Hein means yes. So not just your hin should be tzedek, not that just your weights. You should make sure your weights are cleaned all the time. and you must check that they haven't been rubbed down so that they give an accurate weight when you're selling things to people by weight. So not just your hin has to be correct, your hein has to be correct, your yes. Same idea. She'ei lav shelcha tzedek ve'hein shelcha tzedek. That when you say no, it's a commitment. And if you say yes, it's a commitment in a business deal. You say yes if you want to be very careful, and even though you didn't sign anything. There's an old joke about Cecil B. DeMille, who was one of the founders of the Hollywood film industry. His big tycoon, who used to say that a verbal contract is not worth the paper it's written on. In Judaism, we say that a verbal contract is a contract as good as a written contract. Your hein, your yes, is an oath. That's a commitment. My father, Shalom, was a very, very straight person. He was known to be a very, very, very yashar. And he was in the furniture business. And he went, in Yiddish, as they say, mechula. He went bankrupt. It happens. So what they do is, when, God forbid, when you should know of it, but if you go bankrupt, if a person goes bankrupt, they call together what's called a creditors meeting, which means everybody that you owe money to comes together and you sit down in the room and you have a look at what the assets are. I mean, every business has a certain degree of assets. Whatever in his business, probably a certain amount of raw wood, a certain amount of furniture which had already been made, whatever it was, whatever the assets are. And they divide up the assets and they pay out whatever the assets are at a certain rate. Let's say whatever's left, let's say they'll pay 10 cents on the dollar. And that's it. You're acquitted according to the law. You went bankrupt, you declared bankruptcy, you divided up whatever assets you had and you paid all your creditors back, and they got 10 cents on the dollar. They didn't get the other 90 cents because you don't have it. So the story goes about must have been about 5 years later, my father got back on his feet and business started to go well again. And he called another creditors meeting and he paid all of his creditors back the other 90 cents on the dollar. All of his creditors. Somebody said to him, why did you do that? You didn't have to do that. You know, you declared bankruptcy, you followed the law. My father said, I owed them the money. It was posher to him. Okay, you know, the law says I only have, but I owe them the money. So that's what I would say as an example of when a person, his hein is a hein. He says yes, he agrees to something, he owes you the money, he owes you the money. And even if though al pi hachok, al pi din, according to the law of the land, that he doesn't have to pay you anything more than that, a person who wants to be careful about his shvuot, his commitments to other people, even though, as we say, there's no motzi shem levatol, there's no motzi shem shemayim levatola, there's no shvuah shav here, there's no false oath, but a noki who wants to be clean has to be careful to make sure that his commitments are honored to the nth degree if he wants to be a noki in the area of shvuos. Okay, we'll move on now to sheker, to lying, truth and falsehood. V'hinei devar sheker, gam hu cholira nitzpashet ma'oid ma'oid bivnei ha'odam. Also, the area of falsehood is something which is a serious sickness, widespread, very widespread amongst people. Vulam, madregas yesh boi. There are different levels of sheker. Yesh b'nei adam she'umnosam mamash hi hashakronos. There are people whose profession is to lie. They're professional liars, tricksters, conmen. Heim ha'ochin uvodim melibam kazovim gemurim leman harbos sicha ben habrios. And it might not even be that these people are conmen. It's just they make up falsehood out of whole cloth in order that they can get up and speak, that they'll grab people's interests. Or lehechoshev min hachomim. Or they'll do this in order to be considered to be wise, that somebody who's in the know. And it's all complete fabrication. They want to be considered people who know, v'yoed devarim harbe, that they're very knowledgeable. V'aleim Nema says about them in Mishlei Yud Beis, To'avas, Hashem sifsei shoker. It's a disgusting thing to Hashem, the lips of falsehood. For it says in Yeshaya, Sifsosechem divrei sheker, l'shonehem avla teger, that their lips speak falsehood, and their tongues utter another word for falsehood, avla. Chazal already made a gezerah in Shabbos Lamed Beis. There are four groups of people who will not in the world to come be makabel, receive, be able to receive makabel, the face of the Shechina, whatever that is, a mystical concept, of course. One of those people, one of those groups that will not be makabel pnei Shechina are the group of liars. Now, of course, shakronim, we're talking about people who are professional and different levels, of course, but we're not talking about somebody who says an occasional fib. That's not. We're talking about somebody who is a habitual and serious liar. That's the kat shakronim. Yesharim krovim lehem. Now that's the sort of how do you say, the mahadran level of liars, if one would put it that way. Yesharim krovim lehem b'madrega. There are others which are close to them in their level. Afal pi she'einam kamohem mamash. Even though they're not like them, they're not as seriously affected by this habitual lying. V'heim ha'mechazvim b'sipureihem b'divreihem. There are those people who like to embellish, let's say, to spice up their stories with things which just aren't true. V'hainu she'ein umnosam. This is not their trade, so to speak. They're not professionals. Loleches ulivdois sipurim, and to give over, to speak out stories and things that actually never, lo nivru v'lo hoyu, never happened and never were. Aval b'voyim l'saper davama. But when they come to speak about something or other, ya'aravu bahem min ashkorim kamo sheyale al rucham. As the whim takes them, they'll interweave into something which is true, things which are not true at all. V'yisraglu bozeh, and people become, it's a very important thing, people become accustomed to this. Al sheshav lehem kamo teva, until it becomes second nature. The problem is not just the saying of the lie, but it becomes that a person debases his own judgment, and he can't tell the difference between truth and lies after a while, because he gets used to interlarding, interspersing things which are totally fabricated into essentially a true story, and he can't tell one from the other. It all becomes part of the same thing. I think there's a famous story about a Hollywood cowboy, going back to Hollywood cowboy who I don't remember who it was, and apparently he came from a very un-cowboyish background in some Midwestern city. And so they fabricated, back in the day, the Hollywood, where you didn't have internet and stuff and Google searches and everything, and you can find everything about anybody with not too much effort. But back in the day, so the Hollywood press offices had this whole machine of generating histories which would be pertinent and appropriate for whatever stars that they wanted to manufacture. So this particular Hollywood, quote unquote, cowboy, quote unquote, as I said, came from some very un-cowboyish place out there in the Midwest, and so they fabricated this story that he'd come from somewhere like, I don't know, Tucson, Arizona, or somewhere, or Santa Fe, New Mexico. So the story goes that when he became very famous, he was riding through the town on the back of this limo, getting a parade out there in Santa Fe, and of course all the townspeople. The story went that he was discovered in a Wells Fargo station, right, and whisked off to Hollywood and became this famous cowboy. And so they were driving past the Wells Fargo station, and he leans across to his press agent and he says, "See that Wells Fargo station? That's where I was discovered." People can believe their own press releases because once they introduce into truth sheker, and maybe actually this story is more appropriate to somebody who's completely independent, but this is an example of how a person can become possessed with something which is untrue and believe it's to be true. He can't tell the difference between truth and falsehood. So he mixes in the shkarim as the desire takes him. And he becomes accustomed to this adshe shav lahem kamoteva, until these false stories become true in his eyes. These are liars, you can't believe what they say because you don't know what's true and what's false. Ukamarnu Chazal, and Chazal say in Sanhedrin, Kach hu ansho shel badai. This is the punishment of a person who is a falsifier. Sha'afilu oimer emes ein shomim lo. And even when he says the truth, nobody's going to believe him. This is what we call in English crying wolf. Shekava hitivu bahem hara azois shelo yuchlu letzeis divreihem nikiyim min hakazav mitoch pihem. That they've already got into this situation where it becomes second nature to them, that it's this evil thing, this bad thing, that it's impossible for them to bring out forth from their mouth something which is clean, true in every aspect, because in there is all mixed up all this total sheker and nonsense. Huma hanavi mitztaya va'oimer, that's what Yirmiyahu, the Navi says, limdu shonom daber sheker va'avei nil'u, that they taught their tongues to the words of falsehood, and they have become weary with wrong. Ha'avei nil'u. V'yesh od acherim, there's another group. Again, we're going down in the scale of severity here. She'chaloim kal mecholi harishonim, their sickness is less severe than the first sickness. V'heim osam she'enam kuvim kol kach b'shekam. People are not fixed so much in falsehood and lying. Ela shelo yochoshu lehisrachek mimenu. But they're not people who are distance themselves greatly from it. As you remember, Chazal teaches midava sheker tirchak, from something which is false, tirchak, rachok, make yourself distant. It doesn't mean just avoid it, it means stay a long way away from it. And therefore, v'im yizdamin lehem, and therefore if they have the opportunity to speak something which is not completely true, because they're not careful about this, yomruhu, they'll say it. Ufamim rabbo, so many times yomruhu derech schok o k'yetz b'zeh below kavana ra. And very often people will exaggerate just to make a joke out of something, and even though they don't have any evil intention, they're not saying to try and trick people, it's something which is false because they want to make a joke or they want to amuse people. For example, the famous story about the fish that was this long. So there was a fish, sure there was a fish. It's not inventing that but maybe it wasn't this long, it was that long. This is another kind of less serious, but still being intermingled with something which is false. Hodionu shekol zeh chefetz rotzon abora baruch hu umidas chasidov. And however, the wise person, this is we're talking about here. This is Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech lets us know that all of this is the opposite, hefech, of the desire of the Creator of the world, who and his umidas chasidov, and the midah of his how do you say, to be a chosid, to be on a higher level. It's against what Hashem wants. Huma shekosov, it says in Mishlei, devar sheker yisna tzadik. Something which is false, even if it's only an exaggeration, a tzaddik hates that. V'huma shebara olav ha'azhara, ba'ah, and that is the warning that comes in Shmos when it says, Medava, as I said before, Medava sheker tirchak, from something which is false, distance yourself. Don't say it. Stay well away from it. The pasuk doesn't say guard yourself from falsehood. Tirchak, make yourself distant from it. Laha'ir oisonu al herchek gadol v'bericha ha'rabba shetzorech livroach mizeh, to inform us, to let us know that we should make ourselves very distant and how much we have to run away to the other extreme, far away from anything which is false. Ukava Nehemiah also it already says, we already know, it says in Tzfania, in the Novi Tzfania, Sheris Yisrael lo yesa avla v'lo yidabru kozov v'lo yimotze b'fihem loshen tarmis. Sheris Yisrael, the remainder of the Jewish people, they will not do something which is avla, which is a sin, which is not true, and they will not speak kozov, falsehood, and v'lo yimotze b'fihem, and you're not going to find in their mouths a lotion of tarmis. Again, sheker, falsehood, deceit. The Chazal say in Shabbos Nun Hey, Choy Somo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu is emes. The seal, the signature, the imprimatur of God, of Hashem, is truth. And if you look into the Hebrew alphabet, you'll notice that emes are the three letters. Aleph is the first letter, Taf is the last letter, and Mem is pretty much the middle. Because Hashem, anything which is true from the beginning to the middle to the end. If you look at the letters of Sheker, Shin, Kuf, and Reish, they're all kind of bunched up at one end of the end of the alphabet. Somebody also pointed out it's interesting that all the letters Emet have a sturdy, foundation. The Aleph, if you look at an Aleph, the Aleph sits on two legs. The Mem has a nice long line at the bottom to keep it nice and solid. And the Taf has two legs. Sheker, the Shin comes to a point, at least in the way it's written in the Torah. The Kuf of the point has 1 point, and the Reish only has 1 point. So Sheker is something which is very flimsy. It has no real kiyum. Emes is Yatziv. Emes v'Yatziv is secure. So he says here in the notes also that this is the way, if you become close to Hashem, is to be very careful with the midah of emes, because that is the seal of Hashem. So through emes, a person comes to be close to Hashem, because that is Hashem's signet ring, so to speak, in this world. ובוודאי שאם האמס הוא מה שבחר בו הקדוש ברוך הוא לקחתו לחוסם בו, surely if Hashem has chosen this midah of emet, of truth, as the way he signs himself off, so to speak, kama yeh hefchoi meso'ov lefonov, how much is the opposite repugnant in front of him. V'hisi HaKadosh Baruch Hu ala emes as hara rabbah. We're going to see now, he's going to bring various sources how important truth is. Dabru emes ish esra'eu. People should speak truth one to another. That's in Zechariah and Yeshaya. It says, Uhuchan chesed kisei v'yoshav olav be'emes. Hashem has prepared his throne with kindness, and he sits upon it in truth. For Aman, it says also in Yeshaya, V'yoma ach ami heima bonim lo yishakru. And he said, even my people, they are my children, and they will not lie. So, halamadata shezeh toli zeh b'zeh. The two are connected one another. To the extent that a person is connected to emes, he becomes a ben of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem's son. If we want to be bonim LaHashem, because we can have different relationships, we can also be avodim. But if we want to be a bonim, we want to be, so therefore we have to, exemplify this midah of emes, of truth. V'ama, it also says, Holamadnu, so that's the end. Holamadata, see, you've learned shezeh toli b'zeh. One depends on the other, as I said. V'Amar says in Zechariah, V'nikra Yerushalayim Ir ha'emes. Yerushalayim is called the city of truth. And the idea of that is that you see that the way we want to praise Yerushalayim is by saying it's a city of truth. Therefore, the idea of something which is truth is something by which you can praise something. And that's why Yerushalayim is called the Ir ha'emes, to praise Yerushalayim. Lahagdil chashivusa, to elevate its importance. Ugavam Razal said it's a makos v'doma es bilvaboy. A person should speak truth in his heart. Kagon Rav Safra, like Rav Safra. Now he doesn't bring it here. I don't know why he doesn't. But the case of Rav Safra is where Rav Safra wanted to sell something, and somebody came to buy it from him, and he offered a certain price for it. And Rav Safra was saying Kriya Shema at the time, so he just kind of, because he couldn't speak. He was in the middle of Shema. So the purchaser thought that he was trying to ask, wasn't prepared to accept the money that he offered him. Let's say he offered him $100 to start off with. So the buyer went, Rav Safra was going, and the buyer says, okay, $200, $300. So at the end of the day, when he finished saying Kriya Shema, he went to the buyer and said, here, take it for $100. So again, that's an expression of Rav Safra, who, even though this guy was prepared to pay him a lot more money, but al pi emes, he accepted the original offer. When it was indicating that he accepted it when the buyer thought that he was demanding more money. So that's where we are. Rav Safra, right? So that teaches you how far truth, the meter of truth goes. The truth, over here there was no lie. He didn't tell him anything false. He didn't say, he just, even in the truth was an internal truth. I committed to sell this thing for $100. So it really doesn't matter after that. Klape, my commitment, that's the truth. So even though he offered me $500, I can't take it. Ukavar asru l'tamid chacham l'shanos hadiburo chutz mishlosh dvarim. Also, we know that Talmid Chacham is it's prohibited for him to bend his words, except for three things. And what are those three things? Are that one of them, for example, I'll just give you one example. If Rashi explains over there that if a person knows, let's say, all of Maseches Kedushin, and he knows it really well, knows it back to front, and somebody says to him, "Do you know Maseches Kedushin?" He can say, "Not very well." He's allowed to not say the exact truth, and I can't lie outright, but he can say, I don't know, not so well. I mean, what's not so well? Even though he does know it very well, because of the midah of anova. That's one example. There's another example. The third example is that if he says, it's an interesting example, that if he says about a certain place where they give hospitality, what's it like over there? Is it a good place to stay? And he's allowed to say that it's okay, even though it's a very good place to stay. Why? In order that it shouldn't be like swamped by people who want to go over there and make themselves a nice freebie, place to be able to camp out there and benefit from the generosity of the Balabayas. So in order to not make it that this place is swamped by freeloaders, he's allowed to say that it's not a fantastic place to stay. So he's allowed. That's a couple of examples there. So I really wanted to get to the end of this, but I think we're going to have to. Yeah, actually, no, that's fine. We got to the end. That's good. That's good. I just want to finish with a nice story, talking about freeloaders. Doesn't really have a lot to do with. There is a Jew in London whose name escapes me now. And I don't. If it comes back to me, well and good. Maybe you know his name, but he was well known as a tremendous Baal Chesed. all of the Meshulachim, all the people who came over from Eretz Yisrael who were poor, who wanted to go and collect money in London, they would go and stay at his this place. He had a whole house which was like converted for people to stay in Stamford Hill. It's bothering me, I can't remember his name. But anyway, and there was a kitchen downstairs, and so one of the Meshulachim, one of these charity people who was coming to collect charity, was sitting at the breakfast table one day, and saying, well, I've been here for about a month, I don't know how much I can stay here, but maybe they'll I don't know what they're going to, maybe they'll kick me out. I've been here a month or more. So the guy opposite the center said, I wouldn't worry about that. I've been here a lot longer than that. They haven't kicked me out. And it was the owner of the place. So I wish I could remember his name, but it should be a big schus for him. I think he's still with us. It bothers me, I can't remember his name. Anyway, Bezrat Hashem, Ad Kan, we talked about falsehood. We talked about truth. We talked about Shavuos, the power of language, of words. Next week, we're going to go on and we're going to talk about Chil Hashem, which, as we said, we spoke about a little bit this week. Okay, all the best.